started writing 9 years ago, actually, and I took a poetry class, and I just haven't stopped writing since that time. So that's been really fun. It's a recent thing, an avocation of mine. I work out at Nebraska Wesleyan University as a grounds manager. My training is in horticulture. So my occupation is very different from my interest in writing, but I find that just you can write about just about anything. And that's been a lot of fun, is to the discovery part of writing. Yeah, I do work outdoors about half the time. And the outdoors certainly influences my writing significantly. Probably more than that was my farm upbringing. And so much of my first writing is about the farm experience and the things I remember that were significant or traumatic, or things that just have stayed with me all these years. And it's a very solid background, I think. My book of poetry is How to Live in the Heartland. And it was published last year, and I'm very proud of it. It's done very well. Actually, it's a collection of poems. It's not really one kind of poem. It's a collection of the different poems I've written. Almost every poem in here has been published in a little magazine somewhere. It took me 8 years to write this book, and hopefully it won't take 8 years to write the second book, but they're organized loosely. It's loosely, the first half is based on my farm experience, and the second half is more as an adult looking at things. So that's roughly how it's organized. Some of the farm poems, like the first one I'll probably read, is called Airing Out. And my mother used to air the house out, farmhouse out, when I was little, in the dead of winter, and you went around the house freezing to death. And to me, that's just one of those just little bits of being on the farm. And so I'll read that one. Another one I'm going to read is Country Girl. That's the title of it. And that's me. And when I wrote that poem, I was remembering me being out in one of our pastures. And I sort of remember the cows around and being in the summer. And I just started thinking about all the images that were around me, the alfalfa and the smells. And I got to thinking that was a fertility. That was a real fertility scene, because I was probably 9 years old at the time. So when I wrote the poem, I placed myself out in that field. Another is called Seamstress, and that's just remembering there was a woman in our town who made clothes, and she was a character. But it's all the little things that go with going to see that woman, and things like that. I'm going to read some Prairie poems, some older poems. When I say old, they've all been written in the last 9 years. Kissing Cousins. This is where I'm in a barn loft and with some distant cousins, and we're having a great time. So those are just kind of some of the things. There's more. Instinct is about that's more of an adult. I'm working out in the yard in the spring, and it's like it's instinct to do those kind of things, and I think that comes along with my background. And I'm going to throw some other ones in here. Oh, there's one called Friday Night at the Plaza, and that's about being a teenager in a small town, and kind of the silly things you do. Well, thanks for coming. I'm happy to be here. Today I got one of my poems is published in this Great River Review, and I have to tell you a little story about the particular poem. It's one of those rare occasions when an editor says, "We'd like to publish one of your poems, but could you edit this a little bit?" And I go, "Yes." And I sent it right back, and then I didn't hear anything, and I thought, I sort of was hoping that they would take the poem, so I didn't send a return envelope, the second time. But here it is. And I got it today, Great River Review. It's out of Minnesota. So I thought this is significant, so I thought I should start the reading with this poem. It's called On the Screen Porch. And this is actually a recollection of me on the farm. So, on the screen porch. High in the oriole nest elm, cicadas buzz the dusk of summer. Awake on a musty mattress, I try the rhythm, try to settle down. As usual, I've been sent to bed before I'm sleepy, before dark, before the rest of the farm family lets loose another day's labor. I imagine a pendulous nest, a flutter of leaf undersides, a pale half-moon expanding the flattened landscape. Low hoots drift my way from the grove, from the hogshed, hungry squeals. My task this long day has been to gather spent cicada shells into a Band-Aid tin, my private papery brood. In dim light, neatly I suspend them on sweet cotton, each facing the gathering dark, each listening to my lullaby. So anyway, I was happy it got published, and I was happy they took it without saying, would you revise this again? I wanted to show you this little, it's not little, it's just recently come out. It's called Inheriting the Land, Contemporary Voices from the Midwest. It's been published by the University of Minnesota. I'm really proud to have some writing in here. It has writings of 84 Midwest authors. So one of the pieces that was published was part of an essay, and I thought I'd read it as an introduction to me. It's from an essay I wrote called Rooted in the Midwest. As a young girl, I was always observing things, ice formations in tractor tire ruts, rough cows' tongues going after sweet grain, green silage being elevated into the silo. I watched my folks shovel manure, chop off chicken heads, castrate pigs, and extract honey. I listened for the John Deere in the lane, to milk hitting the rim of the pail, roosters crowing at dawn, and a ringer washer at work in the cellar. How anything in a person's life influences her writing is, of course, a mystery. I like to think that being a Midwesterner has given me a set of sensibilities, a solid foundation, if you will, from which to work. At an impressionable age, I lived and breathed hay bales and clover blossoms and topsoil. Because there were few distractions, I looked at things closely and let my imagination go wild. Being rooted in the Midwest gives me great freedom as a writer. I live now in the city, but at times I find myself walking down that old dirt farm lane, watching the heat shimmer up from Hogemeyer's cornfield on a bright August afternoon. So, there you have it. Well, I'd like to read partly from my book, How to Live in the Heartland, which was just published last year. And I'd first like to say that I'm going to dedicate this reading to two women, one older than I am and one younger than I am. And the person I'm going to dedicate it, the older woman, is my mother. And she can't be here tonight, but I promised her I'd bring her the video sometime. And this first poem I'm going to read is about her. It's called Airing Out. On a bright day frozen in January, Mother props open the upstairs storm windows of the farmhouse. Airing out, she calls it, a midwinter chore. I move from room to room as if in a trance, touch each frozen dresser, each frozen bedpost, my breath a cloud before me rising as if soot from the belly of an ancient coal furnace. I trace each frozen flower on the wallpaper, each swirl on the linoleum. They're unreal today, yet solid as anthracite in memory. At night, the storm windows again secure, I huddle beneath a hand-tied quilt. With aired-out lungs, I breathe and dream. The old house, meanwhile, wheezing its stoked-up lungs deep into a frozen night, puffing smoke to the endless white countryside, the clear, frozen landscape of home. We don't know why we used to do those things, but I still do it today. The second one's called Country Girl. She's beginning to blossom in the sweet clover among the milk cows, straying. Near woman, she ruminates in the bunch grass, in the pasture, and innocent, bleeding, shaping hip and breast in a field of udder, forbidden flower. White clouds puff, exhale, erase clean then a blue slate of sky. Billow and billow now in the sky, all those stomachs bloating beneath the spring sun. Wind catches her ringlet curls, lifting a gathered gingham skirt to the rolling hills, rising and falling now in the rhythm of cud to the wide green sash of earth. Taste of sweet, sweet belly rot from the ground up. That poem I actually started with something I just thought of, and I don't know why I thought of it, but belly and rot, and I put them together, and I don't know what made me think of that, but I thought that's what it's all about, fertility. It just all goes downhill after that. So anyway, who knows where these poems come from. This next poem is called Seamstress. My mother didn't sew, but oh, hi, Marge. Seamstress. It will be a gathered skirt and waistcoat, Goldie tells my mother, her fingers busy on the tissue marking the exact high dart of a possible bust line, the tape measure searching for the waist. She's made clothes for years, and of course we already know that, but things in small towns need repeating, so they chat about Mrs. Kroger, who's left Dell and the boys on the farm, the low crate price of eggs, and the ladies' aid agenda at the church on Tuesday, my mind drifting like dust following cars on a dry county road. After measuring, marking, and sizing me up, she pulls her latest from the closet, a strapless prom gown, and I snap alive, grow breasts and cinch my waist, trade a page boy for red curls, saddle shoes for pointy toe heels, in the wink of a fresh mascara lash, leave them wordless in a cosmic cloud of pink and netting and chiffon. I'm glad you came, Marge. This next one's called Kissing Cousins. Did any of you have a kissing cousin? Okay, now you might understand this poem. I don't know what that means, kissing cousins, nor do I understand when Dad says with a wink that the Andersons are related on both sides. But what I do know is Myron's eyes, the color of uncut alfalfa, the barn loft where we tunnel through bales to hide from kid sister Ladine, how we play tag for hours in the pent-up dust released from the fields, while the rain at first goes unnoticed, then pattering harder against the shingles, darkening the sky, which was earlier filled with April light, earlier warmth replaced now with a stiff breeze, Ladine's voice muffled far away, me cornered near the hay chute, a charge rising through the unfiltered air, his lips on mine, the surge that quickens even before the first rumble. It was all very innocent. This next poem, Friday Night at the Plaza, might recall a small town experience that some of you may have had. I don't know, riding around in cars in town, I guess that's a big town experience now too, and they're trying to discourage it, but in a small town it makes a bigger impact, I'll tell you. Friday night at the Plaza. After the home game, where the Lions pawed victory from the Vikings on a miracle bomb from Greg Gilbert to Jim Bacon late in the fourth quarter, lifting us almost to ecstasy, if not to Maine, honking out versions of the fight song in Chevys and Fords, from the highway to our turnaround under the elm by First National, and into the Plaza, where we inhale pop and salty corn during cartoons, throw wads at Leroy Wiltsey, chase up and down the center aisle until it begins, the movie, Mask of the Red Death, not knowing decades later, that I'll hear the voice of Vincent Price in everything by Poe. And it's scary. We grab the one next to us without thinking. Next to me, Wesley Carlson, husky redhead from north of town whose blue eyes first burned mine the time my cousin and I rode her paint and my brown mare 6 miles on dirt roads at chore time, whose strong arm now reaches first the back of my upholstered seat, then across my shoulders, his free hand pressing mine to his leg, the film reeling its gruesomeness while he shields my face and ears. And long after, in his ancient Dodge near old Mackenzie's shoulder belt, under a lucky harvest moon, we replay the night, spine-tingly, as if the plot were ours to write, reckless and brand new. I think we always think we're doing things for the first time. I want to read some Prairie poems. They'll be interspersed in here in this reading. So when they crop up, don't be surprised. This is one of the first Prairie poems I ever wrote. It's called 9 Mile Prairie, Mid-May. Are all of you familiar with 9 Mile Prairie? Yes? No? It's a wonderful 270-some acres, unplowed, just 9 miles from the intersection of 10th and O. That's why it's called 9 Mile Prairie.
What direction?
North and west. Set on West Fletcher, south of Highway 34. That's about as specific as I can get, Northwest 48th. But it's inspiring. If I ever have trouble writing, I go out to the prairies. So this is called 9 Mile Prairie, Mid-May. Out here on a hilltop, you discover how brief sunset lasts, watching the red ball sink into the dust, shadows paling the flat-chested hills now knitted in green. Down in the gullies, cool willows and elms thicken with gnats. Birds scatter, bedding down the day, a gradual loss of light, slowing all things to still life. Toward moonrise, deer step out of hiding, owls sweep their prey, bullfrogs chant in mud. In step with the breeze, blue stems rise and fall, cottonwoods rattle, wild indigos bloom. Each day, the repetition of sun and wind and sun, you feel it breathe from the bottom of its deepest roots. This tall grass relic exhales its stored up heat back to the stars. There's a sense of wonder about going to a place like that for me. So I grew up on a farm and everything had been plowed, obviously. In fact, my grandfather probably plowed it. But when I discovered there were places that had never been plowed and left, it's kind of mind-boggling. So I recommend it. This one's called Instinct. Because it's spring and because the sap rises steadily, so rises today the farmer in me. The outdoor beckons, renewal burns in my veins this first warm weekend. So strong is the calling, I become the straw hat madwoman, mowing, chopping, whacking the acreage with a coarse-toothed rake. Out of my way, the dog whimpers under a tree. Birds retreat to the distant grove. Squirrels blink. Because it's spring and because it's time, I till, gather, glean, prepare to nest again, yet another season. These are two, actually, I'm going to read two anniversary poems that I wrote for my better half. The first one's called Wednesday Night Love Poem. I wrote this in about 5 years ago. And I'm not sure he knew what to think of this poem when I got done with it, but, well, I just got done with it, so I gave it to him. It's called Wednesday Night Love Poem. You squat and swill brew, while I poke sense into sticks, the sun behind our backs dipping too low, meanwhile ever to recoil. Night pulls down fast like a heavy drape, drawing frost to meet it on the barren horizon. We are about to feast, you and I, two antiques we can't seem to outgrow, brain and belly catering to most primitive call. We hunker toward the heat, logs forgetting their histories, breaking into beautiful flame. Overhead, leaves darken their October masks, geese flap towards some ancient rhythm. Smoke fills the cortex, the soft cavities behind our eyes. When you grunt, I look up. You, my two-fisted hero with your forehead sloped just so, your dark eyes lit with fire, and me, slack-jawed, crouching to catch your next syllable, my free hand on its own reaching toward your open face. And besides, I just can't help it. I fall in love with you all over again. I think he was in shock after I wrote that poem, but he recovered. This other one I wrote for a 25th anniversary. I cheated. I wrote it a few months early. You know, I can't sit down and write an anniversary poem. I just can't do it. So after I wrote this one, I decided this was it. So anyway, it's the last poem in my book. It's called Chances Are. In the fireplace, early Sunday evening, new logs hiss and smoke, catch fire, oak and locust reducing to ash that later will spread in the garden. You were drinking Cabernet, its aged burnt oak tannins sliding downward. I'm sipping brandy, working its concentrate and vapors into my bloodstream. We are floating into the realm of possibility. Chances are we'll say very little to each other tonight. Dinner guests gone, our only child now on his own. All day your hands have been cutting and fitting and doweling lovely grained hardwoods into the shapes of furniture, quarter sawn and walnut. I've seen your eyes light at the very mention of it. Soon I'll rise to soak in bath oils, smooth myself over sheets fresh off the clothesline, scent of wood smoke and moist earth. The room fuzzes around us, overhead fans spin slow, cats sprawl sleepy over chairs. Outside, a clear navy sky above the city. So this is where good trees go when they die, up in flame and ember. Chances are, I'll say, come join my hands. Let's grow old, go out in style together. I do write for an audience, but I don't know who they are. I'm in two writers groups right now, and one is composed of all women, which is real interesting, and the other is a mixed group, and mixed occupations and mixed backgrounds. Like some people are English teachers, for example, and other people are like philosophy instructors, and one guy's a musician, and it's just a fun group. It's a lot of different stuff. They're not all poets. And that's a challenge. So when I bring something, the rule is to bring something new to the group and share it and get instant feedback. And that's a challenge. The way I write is that I wait till something hits me. The muse has to goose me. And then I write. And so what I do is carry a notebook around with me, because an idea might hit you when you're out in the boondocks somewhere, and I have found that if I don't write it down, or just the seed of an idea, I have a notebook that's just full of great ideas for poems, but I also found that if you don't write the poem right away, it can get cold pretty fast, the idea. So I try to write the idea out as soon as I can and get the beginning of a poem. Sometimes, like if I go out to 9 Mile Prairie, I'll just write down all the images I see, just write one after the other. And then hopefully I can kick it into some sort of poem. This next part, these poems are not in my book. This first one's called Hanging Out the Wash. A splendid morning, this my one backward habit ingrained in memory, too gratifying to modernize. How many years ago I watched Mother washing hankies, crochet work, doing first items requiring a delicate touch, hands feeding a toothless wringer which squeezed back each last drop, water going grayer and grayer until she's down to honest dirt, overalls and denim work shirts knotted, churning like thin mud straight from Clay Creek. Today it's not so much this work I'm interested in, more the sun poking early through the maple leaves, moisture rising off the fescue, cries of baby jays from the redbud. And my hands, so much like Mother's, smoothing later the southern breeze sifting up slow from the bed sheets. There's something about clothes, especially sheets, that have been hanging on the line. It's a touchstone for me. This one's called Photos. With her point and shoot, Mother is taking photos these days, prints returning mostly of the room, her great-granddaughter's head smiling out from the corner, slightly out of focus. Yet entertaining, like the old home movies, Father recording our lives, 4-H cattle, extended gatherings, birthday suppers in the old farm kitchen, days quaint with young sweat and healthy smiles, reels that upon rewinding play our lives to hilarity, grain defying gravity back into the wagon, snowdrifts pushing the plow in reverse, my brothers in a backward shuffle on the steps into the house, and Mother, unstooped, her bones yet prime and sturdy, squinting and waving toward the camera, her living husband, the future still out of focus, quite distant. This one isn't a new poem, but it's not in my book. It's another 9 Mile Prairie poem. And this time, it's the harvest moon over 9 Mile Prairie. Almost in the time it takes to say twice gray-headed prairie coneflower, the moon due east rises at sunset like a slice of cheddar, hangs fat above the city tree line, grows soft in the aftermath of a shortened day. Out on these rolling acres we've known so much, stiff goldenrod, purple dotted gay feather, giddy bright crimson of the sumac, pollen hanging yellow and delicate from the heads of Indian grass, purple tinged blue stem. And beside me you're breathing the same musk that drifts up from the darkened ravine, hearing the same guarded movements of deer, the same flap of quail from this ridge, not yet fall, but ripened summer, our hands together and warm, standing braced on this virgin land, you and I making dreams under a plump moon, making sure what they say can happen this impending night happens. Something about that prairie. Oh, another prairie poem. Let's see. Let's don't peek too early here. Yeah, I think so. It's okay. There's one other poem I want to read in here. When the Prairie Speaks. When the prairie speaks, it whispers, I'm wearing my purple dress, my red slip, now my golden wild underthings. Oh, can you recall how on that autumn afternoon in a slant of sun, the breeze called you out of that stone life, how you and your love took flight skyward like startled pheasants. It says, I'm the distant hillside, patient, waiting for you, discovery in every season. Laid out, it whispers, I'm yours. Be listening. My husband and I took a trip to the Southwest in January, and we had driven I-80 lots of times towards Colorado. We went through Colorado, we went western Nebraska and down in the summer, but this time it was in the winter, and it was so different. Maybe all of you have driven western Nebraska in the winter, but I had never done that. And it struck me how beautiful it was, how stark it is. Anyway, I wrote this poem called Toward the Rockies. Western Nebraska in winter stretches before us silent and stubbled, weighted sky and horizon almost indistinguishable. Scruff trees show us only outlines and abandoned nests, and the part of us that's antisocial, that prefers to shut doors, is satisfied. Near Ogallala, sand pits frozen and nothing but hay country now, we move into an occasional bend, cowboy hats, pickups, and windmills going about their business. Frost makes a fairyland of bunch grass, cedar, the short green wheat field. Ahead of us, wind skipping snow across the highway. Then we're south of the Platte on a diagonal into Denver. Aridity soon to rise tall like miracles. When at last we speak, it is the language of soaring and of wing, the language of hawk. I have to tell you that we played a little game to pass the time in the car, and it was called Hawk. And first one to see a hawk, had to yell hawk. And we kept tabs. And this trip down to Arizona and New Mexico, it was a 147 hawk trip. And I was 4 ahead when we got back. So there's really no rules other than we sort of both have to see it, So, but he was driving almost the whole trip. So anyway, it's a lot of fun. You might try it sometime. This one's called Backyard. It's that place after I've gone everywhere, seen everything I can't wait to return to. Trumpet creeper and sumac and blue stem, prairie small enough to be taken in. And I sit at dusk with a fat cat on my lap, watching blue in the form of jay become red in the form of sunset. My backyard unable to contain itself, already a half moon nesting atop the ash. And I'm like that myself, I guess, at home but not contained. Already my wild heart beating, as if those wings sufficient to have brought me back, in spite of all that's so secure, to lift me somehow far, far away. My backyard is a little bit of a controversy. Actually, it's the front yard that's a controversy, but that's a whole nother story. It's, people don't understand it when your grass is 5 foot tall and theirs is like 6 inches tall. I like to grow prairie grasses, but it's a little different. This one's called 9 Mile Prairie, Early Spring, and I've dedicated it to my friend Marge. Marge goes out to the prairie once a week without fail, and sometimes more than that. So I figure anybody who goes to the prairie once a week deserves her own poem. So this is for her. Note the sun, how it has tipped the grass ends to tangerine. At first, it will seem that nothing alive moves. Try scaring some bullfrogs into the Ripley pond. Step lightly aside from the snake, its dull green torso disappearing into the thatch. The wind, strong against your cheekbones, blows on north, bending the spent blue stem. Last week's rain has settled in the plum thicket, the gaudy velvet sumac stalks on standby. Pull at the switchgrass, its stems now stiff, until you notice the cuts in your palm, the blood on the old shirt borrowed from your husband. Roll over and over a glacial pebble down the west ridge. Hike to the highest point, turning slowly in each of the 4 directions. Watch the hawk looping low over the tall grass. Observe the emerald green wheat field, its tender uprising a promise. 2 bluebirds will fly off from their nest box. Take it as a signal. Sit down. Wait for the ground cherries to swell. Of course, I write free verse, but I try to concentrate on concrete images. I try to get at something abstract by using real things, and hopefully I do that. But I use sight, smell, taste, the senses, all of the senses, and color comes into my... One definition of poetry is nibbling at the edge of something vast. You know, words nibbling at the edge of something vast. And I think that's really true because you can't put everything in your poems, so you just start to nibble away at something that's bigger than that. Okay, well, being a Nebraskan places you out in the great wide open spaces. And I believe that it gives you a lot of freedom. So maybe we're not writers in the Midwest or in Nebraska, are not paid attention to maybe as much as on the coast. But that's okay, because we have a lot of freedom to just write about anything we want. And there aren't these rigid rules that I know of out here. I think of just having lots of freedom as a writer. And that's important, not to be clammed up and think, oh, I have to write like the big names back east. Although I'm very much influenced by modern poets, and I read a lot of modern poets. I'd like to end the reading with a series of poems to the second woman that I want to dedicate this reading to. The second woman is quite a bit younger. In fact, she's a baby. My granddaughter, who was born 8 months ago, Kathleen, and I wrote this first poem about a year ago when we heard the news. It's called Planting the Garden. Because a poet once said, "The moon is always female," I plant my garden in a burst. Straight rows, mounds of hope, ignoring the old farmer's advice. Welcome diversion to the heavy coat of winter, or to the problems of writers who sift through notes, staring at the odd phrase that has now lost its sting, wondering what on earth we had in mind. Spring at last, something to focus on, something to pay off. And because the moon is always female, I scratch at this earth. Who needs petty feedback? We liked your poem empty, but felt it lacking. When terrestrial things are sufficient, their own self-contained miracle. And now, especially, after the news, as I burrow more determinedly the rows to become peas and lettuce and spinach, that the seed of my only offspring will likewise this fall come to bear, that by the full harvest moon, they tell me, I'll be a grandmother. How sweet the rhythm of seed and soil and heartbeat, carrying all of us into this ripening season, the wordless moon, always female, rising plump. Well, Kathleen couldn't be here tonight. She goes to bed about now. I would have liked to have brought her. These next 3 poems are for her. It's really something having a grandchild. Anyway, this one's called Beginning Dance for Kathleen Clare. The curved fingernail slice of moon floats upright against a darkened sky this last night in September. Only minutes ago, it was the corals and the reds, the sun on a downflame toward Earth, a youthful moon to the west-southwest to follow. Snug in a house of women, a young man watches his newborn purse her lips, plot the far-flung axes of the universe. At the edge of town, fall fields of half-green corn plants spread effluvia into the half-warm airwaves, a raucous gathering of blackbirds lining distant trees. Born on the cusp, this child will teach her parents a language they never knew existed, filled with a bright lexicon of stars, the purple determined pull of the moon. Soon we'll marvel at each season's sunsets, at growth so rapid we're left without breath. We will all, very soon, begin to dance. And we are, believe me. I'm just going to read 2 more poems. This one's called Full Moon Partial Eclipse. And I'm very pleased to report this is going to be published in Iowa Woman. This is my first Kathleen poem that's going to be published, so I'm happy about that. Full Moon Partial Eclipse. Down the street, a 3-month-old stirs all night fussy, keeping her parents on uncertain edge. We are loping toward the holidays, toward the shortest day, the moon meanwhile only partially eclipsed, hidden behind layers of cloud-heavy sky, the latest storm missing us. Out on the prairie, snow-covered tall grass protects its young, rocks them peaceful in the all-night breeze, and all-night melt seeping into earth pores. In early morning, a naked full moon illuminates the room, its light awash over our surprised skin. Oh, see now that child, her perfect round face asleep, serene, yet ever-absorbing, breathing harmony. Then I'll close with the poem I actually wrote like the day after my granddaughter was born. It just sort of came out all in one piece, and pretty much was like this when I wrote it, and I felt really lucky that happened. That doesn't happen very often. But as a writer, you really like those kind of things. But it just so happened that they were having a Prairie celebration on September 20th, and my granddaughter was born the next day on Monday, the 21st. So this one's called At the Prairie, the Day Before. The day before you arrived started much like today, clouded and misty, a day of celebration of families near the city on 9 Mile Prairie, where many gathered in an afternoon of festivities, poetry, fiddling and guitar, nature hikes, and the swift feathered release of raptors. The day before you arrived, stirrings already begun, autumnal equinox, changing of seasons, and you pressing heavy on your mother's spine. We celebrated women, women on the prairies, and prairies, acres of tall grass now but a remnant of what had once seemed endless, yet the sky still defining the horizon on a day much like today, flat, filled with moisture. Out on a section of mowed prairie, the effluvium of sweet damp hay rose up to greet us, voices of celebration and of mothers and of earth, laughter of children playing games, the buggy rides, wings lifting free at last. On the day before you arrived, there was yet so much to learn, too much to touch all at once. the parting of big blue stem, rough sunflower, dotted gay feather, showy wan goldenrod, the silk of Indian grass. We toured the prairie to connect with what is almost lost, celebrating women, celebrating mothers, trying in our very bones to connect with Mother Earth. You were speaking to us even then, the day before you arrived, a day that started out in fog, you stirring your father to nervousness, in your own manner telling us all to listen, though it was yet somewhat early. The song and dance and celebration on the prairie was, though we didn't yet know it, only the beginning. And surely the women on the prairie knew deep in their bones that one day, generations later, you might be here. That on the day before you arrived, we might be celebrating women out on 9 Mile Prairie, and that the love they planted in their homes would be the planting of the seed that would one day be celebrated by your arrival, passing down, as women and men do, generation to generation, the seed. Arriving as you did today, resembling the tight folded bud of the blue downy gentian, the bright bloom of your skin against the pastel wrap of our receiving arms, with your dark hair and eyes and wiggling tongue and your wrinkled perfect fingers and toes, that new flower now unfolding into blossom, rare prairie orchid known as nodding lady's tresses, described by the botanist as a delicate spiral of white flags. And it is you, granddaughter, that fragrant orchid of the prairie, now unfolding to wave among the forbs and the grasses as we gather into the sun in this last day of summer in one deep and universal breath. Thank you.